Have you ever felt a dread so profound it seems to poison the very air you breathe? In small, forgotten towns, some secrets don't stay buried. They wait, patiently, for the right person to start digging. The day began, like any other, in the suffocating stillness of Havenwood. In a small, weathered farmhouse nestled at the edge of town, an elderly couple, Arthur and Helen, had just finished their meager breakfast. The air was already heavy with the promise of a blistering sun. Helen meticulously finished tying the laces on her worn-out work boots and looked over at her husband.
"Are you ready, Arthur?" she urged, her voice thin but clear. "Let's get a move on. We need to get out there early if we want to get anything done before the heat becomes unbearable. A little while longer and that sun will be too fierce to work under." From the dark, cluttered confines of the storage shed, Arthur's voice came back, slightly muffled. He was rummaging around for something. "All set, my dear. Just let me grab the good hoe, and we can head out. You're right. We need to beat the sun."
Helen sat on the porch steps, her back aching preemptively. She tilted her head back, her gaze drifting to the pale, cloudless sky. It was a bleached, indifferent canvas that seemed to mock the parched land below. She sighed, a small puff of air in the vast silence. "What is this weather?" she murmured to herself. Day after day of this oppressive heat, not a single drop of rain. How is a soul supposed to work in this? With a groan, she pushed herself to her feet. Just then, Arthur emerged from the shed, the weathered hoe resting on his shoulder. He caught the tail end of his wife's complaint and offered a tired smile. "Now, Helen, the rain and the sun are the business of the heavens. What can we do about it? Let's just be grateful we can still get some work done. Every little bit helps. We need to send that money to our Emily for her schooling."
"I suppose you're right," Helen conceded, her shoulders slumping slightly. "It's just, you can only blame these old bodies of ours. We're not as young as we used to be, and the work we do barely amounts to much these days." Her thoughts, as they often did, drifted to their only child. "I wonder how the little one is doing up there. Is she healthy? It's been so long since we've had a letter. I worry so much, Arthur."
Arthur chuckled, a warm, reassuring sound. "Our Emily is a grown woman now. She knows how to take care of herself. You shouldn't worry so much. She's probably just buried in her studies, no time to write. Besides, even if she sent a letter, it would take ages to get here. If you want, I can swing by the post office this afternoon when I'm free, just to check."
Helen nodded, but the moment her daughter was mentioned, a strange and unwelcome sensation coiled in her stomach. A sudden, searing heat shot through her gut, sharp and deeply unsettling. A premonition.
"Arthur," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Why is it that as soon as we speak of her, I feel so afraid? My whole body feels like it's on fire." "Oh, you," he chided gently. "Always finding something to fret about. We have a mountain of work to do, and you're here worrying about ghosts. Our Emily has always been a smart, quick-witted girl. You know her spirit better than anyone. What could possibly happen to her?" "But it feels so real," she insisted, her voice rising with an urgency she couldn't control as she pulled up the sleeve of her flannel shirt. "Look!" The skin on her arm was a field of tiny, sharp needles, a landscape of pure anxiety. "My skin is crawling, and there's this heat inside me. I can't explain it. I'm just so worried something has happened to her." Seeing the genuine terror etched in her posture, the proof on her skin, Arthur's light-hearted facade finally crumbled. He grew serious, lines on his face deepening. "You're not joking, are you?"
Would I joke about something like this, Arthur? Look at me. This feeling, it's unbearable. My worry is for our little girl. What if something has happened to her up there?
He softened, his own fear now mirroring hers. It's probably just because you miss her so much. You're worried she's not eating right or getting enough sleep, and it's twisting you up inside. All right, how about this? We finish weeding this last section over the next couple of days, and then we'll take a trip up to the city. We'll go see her ourselves. The suggestion was a lifeline. Helen clung to it, agreeing instantly. It had been too long since she'd seen her daughter. To be able to see for herself that she was safe and well was a profound relief. After a few more words of reassurance from Arthur, she felt calm enough to face the day. They gathered their tools and started the short, silent walk to the fields. They had walked a short distance when they passed their neighbor Martha's place. She was on her porch and spotted them. "Arthur, Helen, you two are up and at it early. Goodness, I haven't even gotten breakfast on the table yet, and you're already heading out."
"Morning, Martha," Helen called back. "This heat is just too much for us old folks, trying to get it done before the sun is high enough to cook us. We can't take it like we used to when we were young. A little sun, and we're completely exhausted." "You two are just too diligent, I swear," she laughed. "Makes me feel ashamed, still fiddling with chores around the house. You're getting on in years. You should be taking it easy."
Helen shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "How can we take it easy? If we stop working, where will the money for Emily's college come from? It's exhausting, truly, but we have to keep going. We want her to get a proper education, to have a better life than us. We don't want her to spend her days stooped over in some ditch like her parents." "That's a very progressive way of thinking," Martha admitted. "Not like folks around here. They think once the kids are grown, they should work with their parents or find any job to make money." Arthur stopped, leaning on his hoe. His voice was firm with conviction. "Times are different now, Martha. It doesn't matter if a kid is brilliant or just average. They need an education. That's the only way to find a good life. We were lucky. Our Emily is a bright girl and she works hard. But even if she wasn't, we'd do whatever it took. It's the most important thing in this new age." He was right, of course. Everyone in the village knew Emily. She was beautiful, brilliant, and unfailingly kind. The pride of Havenwood. Then, as if a thought just struck her, Martha's face lit up with a casual curiosity that would shatter their world. "Oh, that reminds me. I was so surprised she came back so suddenly. Why aren't you two at home with her? Goodness, your beautiful daughter comes all the way home from the city, and you run off to work?" The world tilted. Arthur and Helen stopped dead in their tracks. "What did you just say?" Helen breathed. "I was just asking about Emily. Why aren't you home with her now that she's back?" "Back?" Helen repeated, the word a dry rasp in her throat. "What do you mean, back?" Martha finally saw the sheer panic on their faces and looked flustered. "Well, last night, late, I saw someone who looked just like her, walking right past my house, heading this way. I see her all the time when she's home. I know her walk. I just assumed it was her."
"She's not back," Arthur said flatly, his words like stones dropping into a deep well. "If she were back, we wouldn't be going to work." "Oh," Martha said, looking embarrassed. "Well, I guess it wasn't her. It was so late, you know. I just saw her shape and figured it was Emily. My mistake. I must have been seeing things." Helen's unease erupted into a full-blown inferno of terror. "Are you sure, Martha?" She pressed, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you really see my daughter?" She hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Well, I can't be 100% certain, Helen. I'm just telling you what I saw. It was late. I got up to use the outhouse, and when I opened the door, I saw someone walking down the road. She had a backpack on, carrying a duffel bag in her hand. The shape was just like Emily's. I almost called out, but she just kept walking, and it was so late. I figured I'd just come over and say hello in the morning. So it wasn't her." Arthur's sharp denial was meant to end the conversation, but for Helen, it was the beginning of a waking nightmare. Martha's words, meant to be a retraction, instead painted a terrifyingly vivid picture in her mind. Her daughter, alone on a dark road, not coming home. She couldn't shake the image. The walk to the field was no longer silent with shared fatigue, but with a new, suffocating tension. Every rustle of leaves in the dry brush sounded like a footstep. The buzzing of insects sounded like hushed, menacing whispers. The world itself seemed to be watching them, aware of a tragedy they had not yet discovered.
They reached the field, an expanse of cracked, thirsty earth under a merciless sun. "All right," Arthur said, his voice strained. "Let's split up. You take this side, I'll go over there." Helen merely nodded, unable to form words. She began to work, the rhythmic thud scrape of her hoe a hollow, mechanical action. Her mind wasn't on the weeds. It was on that dark road with the impossible silhouette of her daughter.
Not an hour had passed before the world began to change. The oppressive heat did not fade. It was choked out. A sudden, unnatural chill swept over the field as the sky, once a pale, empty blue, began to curdle. Bruised, dark clouds gathered with impossible speed, boiling and churning as if the sky itself were being poisoned from within. The world was plunged into a gloomy, midday twilight, the air thick and electric with a malevolent energy.
Then, from Arthur's side of the field, the rhythm of his work broke. A sharp, jarring clank echoed across the silent field. He stopped. He stood there, a motionless silhouette against the darkening sky, his hoe stuck fast in the ground. He bent down, expecting a rock, a stubborn root. But the object he pulled from the earth was something else entirely. Cold, metallic, and horribly, horribly familiar. As Helen approached, a low rumble of thunder vibrated through the ground. He held the object out. It was a silver bracelet, caked with dirt. Helen took the bracelet, her fingers trembling so violently she could barely hold it. A jagged bolt of lightning tore across the sky, and in that stark, bleached white flash, she saw the delicate engraving. A name. Emily. Her heart stopped. Her voice was a choked whisper. This is Emily's. He snatched it back, his face a mask of violent disbelief. Another flash of lightning confirmed her words. His gaze dropped from the bracelet to the spot on the ground where he had found it. His mind reeled. The bracelet was here. The premonition. The neighbor's story. They were pieces of a puzzle locking together into a picture of pure horror. Without a word, with a guttural cry that was more animal than human, he began to dig. A deafening clap of thunder exploded directly overhead, and the heavens opened. Rain fell in a solid, blinding sheet. When the hoe became too clumsy in the sucking mud, he threw it aside and fell to his knees, clawing at the earth with his bare hands. Finally, his frantic movements ceased. His whole body went limp. His eyes, wide and lifeless, were fixed on the shallow, muddy hole he had just clawed from the earth. His face was a pale, rain-streaked mask of utter horror. Helen's breath hitched. She slowly turned her head to follow his gaze. Another flash of lightning seared the sky, and she saw it. Buried in that shallow, muddy grave was their daughter. A scream tore from Helen's lungs. She scrambled forward, falling into the hole, cradling the cold, lifeless body of her child, her eyes closed forever. Arthur simply sat back on his heels,
his face vacant as he stared into the abyss of his worst nightmare made real. The news of Emily's death fell upon Havenwood like a shroud. The official cause of death was listed as inconclusive, a sterile, bureaucratic term that did nothing to explain the horror of her burial or the chilling lack of any wounds on her body. The town was gripped by a quiet, suffocating fear. Doors were locked earlier. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. The story of the girl found in the earth became a whispered, cautionary tale. But Emily's death was not an end. It was a beginning. A key turning in a very old, very rusty lock. The first to fall after Emily was old Mr. Abernathy, the town's most ancient resident, a man whose memories were as gnarled and deep as the roots of the oldest oak. That evening, as a cold, unnatural fog crept through the village streets, a small figure knocked on his door. It was Lily, the neighbor's young daughter, the one Jacob had asked to watch over him earlier after he had collapsed from a dizzy spell.
Mr. Abernathy, the small voice called. Jacob sent me back to check on you. He was worried. The old man, frail and weak, shuffled to the door. Lily, child, what are you doing out in this fog? You should be home. He peered at her, but in the gloom, her face was a pale, featureless oval. I wanted to make sure you were okay, she said, her voice unnervingly flat. She took a step inside. You know secrets, Mr. Abernathy. Old secrets about the sewing. Abernathy froze, his blood turning to ice. That word. No one had used that word in 50 years. He looked at the girl again, truly looked at her, and saw that the eyes in the pale, shadowy face were not the eyes of a child. They were ancient, black pits of malevolence. You're not Lily, he stammered, stumbling backward. The thing, in the shape of a child, smiled, a smile that was too wide, too sharp. I am now. It moved with impossible speed. Abernathy felt not a sharp pain, but a sudden, shocking cold in his stomach. He looked down. The large hunting knife he kept mounted above his fireplace was now buried to the hilt in his gut, pinning him to the wooden wall of his own home. He opened his mouth to scream, but only a wet, gurgling sound came out. The last thing he saw was the small, shadowy figure giggling as it faded back into the fog. Emily, buried in the soil, was earth. Mr. Abernathy, pierced by steel, was metal. The discovery of Abernathy's body sent a fresh wave of panic through the town. Jacob, the man who knew a fragment of the terrible truth, was now a vessel of pure terror. The whispers he'd overheard from the elders years ago were no longer drunken ramblings. They were prophecy. He had to warn someone. He had to run. He fled into the woods as night fell, the trees closing in around him like the bars of a cage.
He ran, but there was no escape. The forest itself had become his enemy. Roots snaked up from the ground to trip him. Branches, like skeletal arms, clawed at his face and clothes. He could hear it hunting him. Not a sound of footsteps, but a feeling, a pressure in the air, the scent of damp earth and decay. He scrambled up a small ravine, desperate for open ground, his lungs burning. He burst through a thicket of thorns and saw, for a heart-stopping moment, the clear, moonlit sky. And then he felt a sharp, unyielding impact. It wasn't that he ran into the tree. It was as if the tree itself
had lunged forward to meet him. A thick, broken branch, sharpened to a spear point, pierced his chest, lifting him from his feet and pinning him in a final, gruesome embrace.
Jacob, slain by the tree, was Wood. Deputy Miller found him an hour later. He was a young man, a man of logic and reason, and the things he was seeing in Havenwood were tearing his reality apart. He stood by the creek at the edge of the woods, the flashing lights of his patrol car casting strobing, demonic shadows on the trees. He needed a moment. He knelt by the water, the same creek that burbled peacefully every other day of the year. Tonight it was black, still, and silent as a tomb.
He stared into his own reflection, but for a split second, the face that stared back wasn't his. It was a pale, waterlogged face with eyes full of mud. Emily's face. He recoiled, crying out. It was just a trick of the light, he told himself. His mind was playing tricks on him. He splashed the cold water on his face, trying to ground himself. But the water was wrong. It was thick, heavy, and smelled of the grave. Before he could react, a force, immense and powerful, erupted from the creek. Hands made of mud, weeds, and grasping roots shot out of the water, wrapping around his head and neck, dragging him down. He struggled, his training useless against something so impossible. The water filled his lungs, not as a liquid, but as a solid, choking mass of earth and supernatural hatred. His last thought was not of procedure or backup, but a single, terrifying word. Water.
The cycle was almost complete. One element remained: fire. Just as all hope seemed lost, they arrived. An old man, his hair as white as snow, and a young boy appearing at the edge of town as if from nowhere.
The old man, Elias, understood the sickness in the air. The five-fold curse, he whispered after hearing the tale. It has been awakened. The deaths are not random. The cycle is almost complete. The one who will die by fire. And when that happens, a new cycle will begin. He marked the deaths on a map, forming an incomplete pentagram. The final death will occur here, he said, his finger tapping the center, at Arthur and Helen's place. At that moment, Helen ran toward their desecrated home. Inside, Arthur stood before Emily's photo. The air was thick with the smell of kerosene. He turned to her, but it wasn't him. His eyes were flat, dead, and a horrifying, unnatural smile was plastered on his face.
It's time, the thing wearing her husband's face said, holding a lit match. It dropped it. The world erupted in flames. Just as the fire took hold, Elias and the others burst through the door. While they dragged Helen outside, Elias moved with impossible speed. He forced a vial of dark liquid down Arthur's throat, and he collapsed, the entity's hold on him momentarily broken. "It is not over," Elias shouted. "The curse was anchored by 5 families in a blood pact. We must break the anchors. At the site of each death, a totem is buried." A desperate race against time began. Guided by Elias, they went to each horrifying location, finding a small, rotting wooden box at each. They brought the 4 boxes to the smoldering ruins of the farmhouse.
This house was the final anchor, Elias said grimly. The 5th box is in the ashes. Together they sifted through the hot embers. Finally, they found it. Elias placed all 5 in a circle and began to chant in a language that was ancient and powerful.
The town of Havenwood was saved, but the scars remain. It lost 4 souls to the darkness,
and the beautiful Emily was the key that unlocked it all. Arthur and Helen lost their daughter, their home, everything, but they did not lose each other. It was not a happy ending. There is no happiness in a world where a child has been stolen. But it was not a bad ending, because they survived. The community survived. They stood together in the ashes of their old life, and they chose to live.
The curse was broken. The 5 totems had turned to ash, and the malevolent presence that had choked Havenwood for days finally dissipated, leaving behind only the clean scent of rain and smoldering wood. The sun rose on a town that was saved, but not whole. For Arthur and Helen, standing amidst the ruins of their life, the terror had ended, but the haunting had just begun. The curse was gone, but its questions remained, whispering in the quiet moments. Why? Why our Emily?
Days turned into weeks. The town tried to heal. Funerals were held, and stories were fabricated for the outside world. A tragic house fire, a series of unfortunate accidents. No one spoke of the elemental deaths, of the impossible things they had witnessed. But the truth festered beneath the surface, a rot in the soul of the community. It was Elias, the old man who had come like a phantom and vanished just as quietly, who finally provided the answers. He left behind a single sealed letter for Arthur and Helen, delivered by the young boy who was his constant companion. Inside was not a story of a curse, but a confession of a sin.
The history of Havenwood was not written in ink, but in blood and desperation. The story began nearly a century ago, during a winter so harsh it strangled the life from the land. Crops failed, livestock perished from a wasting sickness, and famine, like a patient predator, stalked the door of every home. Havenwood was on the verge of ceasing to exist, a forgotten footnote in the annals of hardship.
It was in this crucible of absolute desperation that 5 men, the patriarchs of the town's founding families, Abernathy, Miller, Jacob, Cunningham, Arthur's ancestor, and Hawthorne, committed an act that would forever stain the soil. They sought out a drifter, a man known only as the Master, a purveyor not of blessings, but of the dark promises of ancient folk magic.
The Master promised them prosperity. He claimed he could bind the very spirit of the land to their bloodlines, ensuring their descendants would never know hunger, that their crops would always be bountiful, and their livestock always healthy, so long as they remained in Havenwood. But the price for this unnatural abundance was a sowing tithe, a sacrifice to anchor their pact to the earth, the 5-fold pact.
The 5 men, with death scratching at their doors, agreed. They performed the ritual under a new moon, mixing their own blood into 5 wooden boxes, each representing an element. But the Master had omitted the most terrible truth about the sowing tithe. The pact did not just require their blood. To truly take root, to warp the laws of nature, it demanded a life, a young soul to be the first seed. It required the death of a child. This was the genesis of the karma, the original sin. Faced with this horrifying choice, the 5 patriarchs made a ruthless decision. They chose one family to bear the ultimate sacrifice, the Hawthorns. They lied, saying the ritual was complete, but in the dead of night, they stole the Hawthorns' firstborn daughter, a little girl with hair the color of autumn leaves. They took her life and buried her small broken body
in the very field that Arthur and Helen would one day till. They told the grieving Hawthorne family that their daughter had simply vanished, likely taken by the sickness that plagued the weak. The foundation of Havenwood's prosperity was built upon the unmarked grave of a child.
And the pact worked. Havenwood flourished, but the land, nourished by an unforgivable crime, became twisted. It protected the bloodlines of the pact, but it also owned them. The curse was not a magical spell. It was a living entity, an ancient, hungry consciousness born of sin. Decades passed. The power of the original pact began to wane. The curse needed to be renewed. It needed to reap what had been sown. It needed to complete a full elemental cycle, starting and ending with the element of earth, a buried girl. And that is why it chose Emily. She was not only a descendant of the Cunningham clan, one of the original 5. She was the embodiment of all the light and life the curse craved. Intelligent, beautiful, beloved. She was the perfect sacrifice to restart the cycle with maximum pain and power. Her death was not random. It was the curse coming to collect a long-forgotten debt.
From there, the karma of the others came due. Mr. Abernathy, his bloodline had ended with him. With no descendants to protect, he was a loose end in the pact. The curse saw him as a source of pure energy, a past due account. It consumed him to fuel its rampage. His karma was a lonely death, the price for the prosperity his ancestors bought, but which he could not pass on. Jacob Wood, his ancestor, was part of the pact. Jacob's karma was cowardice. He knew a piece of the truth, the whispers of the 5-fold price, but he chose silence. He hugged the terrible secret to himself, letting fear conquer duty. The curse, as an agent of this dark karma, punished his silence. It didn't just kill him, it used the very forest, a symbol of life, as its instrument of execution. A grimly ironic fate for one who would not speak. Deputy Miller Water. His was the cruelest irony. His ancestor was also one of the 5. The curse does not respect the laws of men. By investigating, by trying to impose logic and order upon a supernatural pact, he was interfering. He was part of the cursed bloodline, yet he acted against its dark will. The curse eliminated him, reasserting its absolute dominion over the land and the blood bound to it.
As Arthur and Helen finished reading Elias's letter, they finally understood. They had not merely lost their daughter to a monster. They had discovered the horrifying truth that everything they had, the survival of their ancestors, the very existence of Havenwood, was purchased with an unforgivable crime. The curse was broken, but the karma was not. It had simply transferred from the land to their souls.
The town of Havenwood was free, but it was no longer innocent. Every plot of land, every ancient tree, every drop of water now whispered the story of the Hawthorne girl and the price of prosperity. Arthur and Helen lived on, but their lives became a quiet, constant penance. They lived not just for themselves, but for the soul of the daughter, who became a sacrifice to pay an ancestral debt, and for the soul of the long-forgotten child, whose death had sowed all this sorrow. The silence in Havenwood now held a new meaning. It was not peace, it was remembrance.